Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome back to the University of Washington. It's great to be here. I'm Paul Rucker. I know many of you. Tonight's conversation and recent conversations are not short on that. I was reminded in talking to David, who told me that I had to wear shorts tonight and that he was going to wear a suit, and so we got it mixed up. 2 years ago, David said, you'll probably recall, I'm not doing this series. I'm not doing it. I'm out. And here we are, 16 lectures later. January 4th, I think I stood up here and I welcomed everybody and I thanked you for your engagement and your attention and your enthusiasm to come back to the university. And so I share that message tonight as well. It's wonderful to see you here. I did not expect, of course, to feel the way that I feel as I come into this conversation. And I'm reminded as the Alumni Association team gathered yesterday morning and talked through this extraordinary series of events that we have a lot of work to do, and certainly a lot more listening to do. And as I look across all of you and I make my assumptions about who you are and how you feel, as wonderful and as amazing as it is to have you here, we have more work to do in the future as an alumni association, certainly as a university and as a community. Last year we did a survey in Washington State, and a scientifically significant survey about higher education goals and objectives with our alums, and 50% of the respondents to our survey said that they affiliate and or are registered as Republicans. 50% of the alums that we surveyed. Do you think we have 50% of those alums with us this evening? You know, it's really striking, isn't it, when we think about how our community functions and who we are as a university body and what it is that happens in the way that we think about these issues. And I know that David has a lot more to say about this, and many of you have a lot more to say and to think about this. But in the Alumni Association, we certainly have seen this as an opportunity to redouble our efforts in connecting with alums that may not entirely feel the way we do here in the university bubble, here in Seattle, here on the coast. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for me as the unit administrator in alumni relations to recognize that if truly those 50% are out there, that certainly isn't to assume that all 50% of them voted for President-elect Trump. But I think it's an opportunity for us to think about what does it really mean for our alumni association to engage an audience that includes all of you, but also includes the others that didn't feel comfortable or excited or enthusiastic to engage with us through this past year. So much work to be done. I'm enthusiastic about David's presentation tonight, but I'm more enthusiastic about him as an individual and what he's done, not just this past year, but all of his years at the university. When David called me, yes, when David called and shared that he was exploring potential opportunities outside of the university a number of years from now, it certainly gave me pause to reflect on the impact and the legacy that David has had, not just in audiences like this, but in classrooms, in pilgrimages, in conversations, in interactions, mentoring future generations of scholars, but also deeply, deeply contributing to the thought leadership of our administration and our leadership. David's impact on me, on the Alumni Association, on how we think about our role as activists and as educators has really been remarkable. I called Lisa up the other day and I said, I'd like to do something for the two of them. Lisa's David's wife. And I said, I'd love to send you guys away for a weekend. And I asked if she could think about where it is that she'd want to go. And she says, my goodness, we haven't been away for a weekend in such a long time, she wouldn't even know. She thought about it. She sent me a note back, and she said, we'd love to go to Lake Quinault for 2 nights. And so I was married at Lake Quinault, and I remember being there, and I thought, you know, that's far enough away that all of you in this room probably aren't going to go out to Lake Quinault. So I thought that was a great idea. So David, on behalf of the Alumni Association, we're going to send you and Lisa away for a weekend. And, and while you're there, I hope that you'll take a moment as you're walking those paths and looking at the lake, just to remember that the University of Washington is a better university because of you. What you do here every day, what you do for our students, for our community, makes a tremendous difference. And in the future, irrespective of where you may be years from now, the Alumni Association is deeply, deeply committed and interested in working with you in a variety of capacities. So we have not seen the end of David Domke in this environment. 2 years ago, he said he wouldn't do it. He was far more agreeable a moment ago when we were talking about it, so I'm excited. So David, thank you on behalf of the alumni community and all of us that know you so well. So before David comes up, I just want to also make a point to recognize that 16 evenings, that's almost one every 20 days, David and I talked about, all of you, your support for the university, the UWAA members that are here this evening, your membership makes a difference. What's happened in the last week has reminded me that being engaged and being active and being vocal and being mobilized are not just words, they're actions. And as we go into the year and years ahead at the Alumni Association, certainly that's a filter that we'll be emphasizing, and I know that all of you will be here to join us as well. So thank you. On behalf of the association and this university, it's great to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Professor David Domke.
That was really nice. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Paul. That was I did not know about this Lake Quinault. My wife never tells me anything, okay? But that is really special. Thank you. I will pair that with another gift that someone gave to me not too long ago, which is they bought 2 tickets for my son and I to go to a NASCAR race, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. And so I put that out there as we need to be going to both of those places in our society. We need to go to Lake Quinault for the hikes, and we need to go to NASCAR because it's just going to be so much fun, okay? And we might just run into some people that we don't often see in this room. So, you know, about that last lecture, okay? You know, I found the envelope that's got my predictions in it, okay? So I've got them right here. Pull them out. Let's see what Nostradamus said, okay? Donald Trump with 290 electoral votes, okay? Wow. Republicans would have 53 seats. I got that wrong by 1 in the Senate, okay? So, you know, where we need to start is by recognizing that sometimes the things that somebody might kind of think is going to happen, or even many people think is going to happen, doesn't always happen. And for everybody in this room, we've all had many of those moments in our lifetime. But I have a 9-year-old son who's never had one of those moments in that way before. Certainly when the Seahawks lost the Super Bowl a couple years ago, that was a moment of, you know, really profound disappointment for him, but not in the way that he had seen his family invest and think about this election. And so I was challenged on Tuesday night to watch the mounting outcome through his eyes and to think about what it meant to him and to think about who had the response that was actually the more mature response. I don't know, there's a lot of wisdom there that I'm going to be sitting with for a while in terms of how my son Sam thought about this. My 15-year-old son Will, he had another response to this. I said, "Where are you going?" And early in the evening, and he said, "I'm going to watch the election with my friends." I said, I'm going to be doing stuff right here too, you know. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to see my friends," okay? And so, you know, I learned a little bit about that too, and how I was the one that walked out that door when I was younger. Right? And how we have to let go and still support and love, even in those moments. So I want to do a talk tonight that is going to be a little bit funny, hopefully. And there might be some sadness along the way. But there's also going to be an enormous amount of determination, okay? And it's going to come from me tonight, but the reality is it needs to come from all of this country now. And it needs to come with a certain humility. It needs to come with a recognition of how we go forward together as a country, all right? So I wasn't expecting to give this talk, of course, tonight. But what I've done for the last 2.5 days is make sense of a lot of things through preparing this talk. And that's the gift that these lectures are to me. The gift of telling a story to myself that I have to understand and I have to interpret and then understand first before I can tell you the story that I think is present. And that story takes a lot of time. For the last 2.5 days, I've thought a lot about it, put together some slides, and then said, no, that doesn't really make sense. I don't think that's it. And then backed it out and all that, all the way up until just about an hour ago, all right? And I think this is one of the most important kind of storytelling moments in my career, of trying to make sense of what's occurred, all right? I've had the privilege to, from 2008, 2012, 2016, to do all these lectures with you. And you know what? For 8 years, things have gone pretty much like I thought they were. Pretty much like it for 8 years. And profound growth usually doesn't come without pain and unexpected circumstances, okay? So if you came tonight to kind of find sadness or despair, it's not going to be up here on this stage. Because with growth also brings opportunities and chances for us to step into a new space, okay? So here's the lecture series we've done this fall. 5 lectures, plus the debate watches. That when you add in the 2 debate watches plus the 2 extra primary meetings this spring, that's how we get to 16 times that we've met over the last almost a little over 11 months. And these are the lectures that have occurred, and then this is the one that I had put out there. Not really thinking that it was going to be packing up as a possibility. Certainly thinking that it would be making sense. And as much as I articulated in that last lecture about the almost certainty that Clinton was going to be elected, there was this gnawing sense inside of me that there was some doubt. There's always been a little bit of doubt. It's difficult to run someone who's been in the American public arena for as long as Hillary Clinton has been for the presidency. It's one thing to run them for the Senate. It's a different thing to run them for the presidency, because the presidency is almost always about a new vision. And so it was going to be forever difficult for the Clintons and for Hillary Clinton to be able to characterize that. And so I thought there was maybe a 7%, that's what I said on KUOW about a week ago, 7% chance that Trump was going to win. But I certainly didn't expect it, but I thought it was possible. It's about the same percent as you might have when you're at the goal line. And you throw a slant pass instead of handing it off to Marshawn Lynch, right? So other people get things wrong too, okay? I'm just saying, all right? I know it's a little raw still. It's a little raw, okay? But you know what? I'm not a packing up kind of guy. It's not my DNA, okay? So I got a different title for tonight's talk. And the title I want to go with, and I'll show it to you in a second here, comes from a crew metaphor, a rowing metaphor. Now, I'm not a crew person. I don't know if even saying you row is the same thing as saying you crew, you do whatever. But I don't know any of that, but I have had the chance a couple times in my life to go on rafting trips. And that's pretty much like crew, okay? And so I'm an expert, okay? And there is a terminology that I do think is part of crew, and I know the University of Washington has quite a history in crew. So it seemed appropriate to kind of use one of those terminologies that I've heard through rafting. There are these moments when you face obstacles. It could be a boulder, it could be an unexpected drop, or an expected drop. And the guide, I've only done guided ones, I'm not crazy, the rafting ones. And the guide will give commands. And they'll say, all forward. And everybody needs to paddle with everything they've got. and you go all forward. And everybody in that boat rows with everything they've got. And you all go forward. All right? So that's the talk for tonight. It's all forward. Okay? It's all forward. I want to do 3 things tonight. Okay? I want to start, actually, I forgot about this quick slide. I got to give you this quick slide. These are mini recommendations, short-term things that I want to forget. And then I'll talk about the 3 things I want to do tonight. Just happens to be 3s for this one and then 3 for the next thing. I want to say that we're in the Department of Communication going to do a discussion on Monday, November 28th, next door, Kane 120. Just put this together in the last 24 hours as a plan. Talking with this title, What Happened? The Role of Social and Conventional Media in the Election of 2016. So we will have people who study and teach about and practice traditional and social media in all kinds of ways at this panel. It'll happen next door in Kane 120. This will be an open public event. You're all invited to come. You're welcome to tell anybody you want. So 2 Mondays from now, November 28th. No, it's 3 Mondays. Is that right? What's today? Today's the 10th? No, it is. Yeah, it's 3 Mondays from today, November 28th, Monday, 7 p.m. Please come. There's a lot for us to think through and talk about the role of the media. Second, I want to, again, but this time with all the oomph I've got, recommend a lecture series by a colleague of mine, Lance Bennett. This is a lecture series that will be done, I believe, next door as well in Kane 120, January 17th to March 7th, every other week, kind of like these, just like these lectures. Lance Bennett runs the Center for Communication and Civic Engagement. He's a brilliant individual. He spends about a third of the year in Europe doing work in partnerships and collaborations. So he has this great kind of vista about the global arena. And he's going to be talking about the American Global Challenge, aligning economy, democracy, and environment in the 21st century. And that's going to be a lecture series that is vital for us understanding how we move forward with President-elect Donald Trump. Okay? To register for that, it's $150 for 5 lectures, and you can register Brown Paper Tickets. All you got to do is go to Brown Paper Tickets and search for Lance Bennett, and you'll find it. It's pretty well registered already, but there are still seats available, and I strongly recommend it. And then third, I will be back to do a lecture series in April, every other week, 5 lectures on the Obama impact, I'm calling it, the impact culturally of Barack Obama, vision, reality, and I didn't have room, but it's 21st century America, okay? And that there are still some seats left for that, and you can register at Brown Paper Tickets for that. So I just recommend these as we go forward to continue the kind of learning, the space. It's valuable for the speakers, and hopefully it's valuable for you, okay? All right. This evening, I want to do 3 things. First of all, I want to make some sense. I want to pull back the layers of the onion and make some sense of this. Second, I want to talk about moving forward, all forward. What it means. What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the things that you might invest your time and energy in? What am I going to invest my time and energy in? All right? And then I want to conclude with a little section on what I'm calling the moral arc of history. A kind of last wrap-up period for this lecture series, and to kind of share where I'm at personally, okay? I want to start on a personal note as well with a quote from a guy that has been a real colleague to me. We don't know each other at all, but we have a very similar professional trajectory. Joshua Micah Marshall runs the Talking Points memo blog, which has been around for more than a dozen years. It's just a really tremendous, reasonable, it's a center-left blog. Over the years, I found a lot of wisdom there. He also crowdsources a lot of ideas and brings other voices into the scene. And Josh Marshall wrote a few reflections. I posted them yesterday after the outcome on Tuesday night, and I just want to position myself using some of his words so you'll know where I come from tonight, okay? Marshall wrote this. I've been reading various reader emails this morning. This was yesterday morning. Thank you for all of them. Through almost 16 years of doing this, your emails have helped me think, see things I don't see, learn. It's been the center of my and then our editorial process. Many of these emails simply express shock, others anger and fear to Trump, to the universe, to me. There is a lot of fear. I know. I feel it. At such a moment, I come back to a thought I've told family members at times of stress or grief. Optimism isn't principally an analysis of present reality. It's an ethic. It is not based on denial or rosy thinking. It is a moral posture toward the world that we find ourselves in. If everything seems great, there's no need for optimism. The river of good news just carries you along. It is when times are difficult that our ethics carry us. And my moral posture is one of optimism. How could it not be? There is no better time in human history for people to have the chance to make a difference. And so I start tonight from an ethic, from a posture of optimism, not a denial of reality. There are many bad things that I'm concerned about in the future related to the outcome of this election. But I also ground myself in a position that the way we see the world becomes the way we live in the world. And I want to challenge all of you to start from that posture. This doesn't mean you can't have hurt or confusion or fear or joy or whatever you might have. But the reality is we have a moral responsibility to see beyond the light of the flashlight. '16 presidential election. Let's spend a little time making sense and thinking all forward, okay? I want to talk about 4 characteristics of the 2016 presidential election, okay? The first thing I want to talk about is turnout. By turnout, of course, I mean who showed up to vote, either physically or by mail or whatever. Who voted, all right? Donald Trump received 1.1 million fewer votes than Mitt Romney in 2012, okay? Trump did not get the Trump turnout, this massive potential hypothetical wave of voters. People didn't come out of the woodwork, out of the mills, whatever, in ways that they didn't for Romney. He got 1.2 million fewer votes than Romney. He got 2 million fewer than John McCain. Right? Okay, so Trump got fewer votes. Well, it doesn't take a genius to think about, well, Clinton must not have gotten as many votes either, okay? Hillary Clinton got 6 million fewer votes than Barack Obama in 2012. Now, the voting's not, the counting is not done yet. California itself will add probably another 1 million votes to this by the time we're done. California takes a long time to count all their votes. Don't know why exactly that is, but it happens every election. They take another week, and they're legally, it's fine for them to do that. It just takes a while. So she's going to end up with somewhere between 5 and 6 million fewer votes than Barack Obama. She got 10 million fewer votes than Obama in 2008. Okay? We're going to have a turnout about 120 million in this election. All right? It was 132 million in 2008, and about 126 million in 2012. So the turnout was way down. All right, and it was really down for the Democrats. All right? So we need to think about this a little bit. What's going on? Okay? Well, one thing that we can do, and I appreciate the Associated Press and then the Washington Post for printing this, because this is a very helpful figure. So we're about to see, when I show you in a second here, a map of the continental United States. And the colors up here, blue, dark blue to dark red, will tell us how the vote shifted from 2012 to 2016. So in the bluer areas, the vote became more Democratic overall. In the redder areas, the vote became more Republican overall. All right? So the bluer is more Democratic, the redder is more Republican. Hillary Clinton, more or less, did just fine through here. In fact, she in many of these places did better than Barack Obama. Texas, she only lost it by less than 10. And that hasn't happened in 20 years. Okay? But it's not going to help her much in an electoral college. So this is clearly where she did okay, and this is clearly where Donald Trump did very well, relative to Mitt Romney. And that, the thing was, this is what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to turn out the votes in the Midwest. I was a little bit surprised to see it all the way up the east. But he definitely turned them out in the Midwest. He turned them out in western and central Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, southern Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin. He came close to winning Minnesota. Okay? So he did what he said he was going to do, and it happened. All right? So this is where the shifts occurred, and the turnout was a big shift in that area. Now let's just look at a couple places to get a sense of how the turnout changed, both dropped and changed from 2012. Wayne County, Michigan. It's the home of Detroit and also my home where I grew up, Dearborn, Michigan, one of the working class suburbs of Detroit. In 2012, Barack Obama got 596,000 votes in Wayne County. Hillary Clinton got 517,000 votes. The difference is almost 80,000. She lost the state by 11,000. She lost these votes in Detroit among a largely black population, and she lost these votes among the suburbs, a largely white population that's working class. That's how you lose a Michigan. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Milwaukee is both a city and a county. We have Barack Obama getting 332,000 votes in 2012. Hillary Clinton gets 289,000, a difference of 43,000. She loses Wisconsin by 27,000. A larger black population in the inner city, suburbs around, Clinton loses. Turnout makes a difference. And then let's look at Pennsylvania. We'll take rural Pennsylvania. What I did is I took out all of Philadelphia and the suburbs of Philly and all of Pittsburgh, and I took it out of the numbers from Pennsylvania and calculated the rest of Pennsylvania, which is pretty much rural Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a pretty rural state, other than Pittsburgh on the west and Philadelphia on the east. So rural Pennsylvania, Obama got 1.4 million votes in 2012. Clinton got almost 2 million votes. A difference of 216,000 votes less than Barack Obama in rural, overwhelmingly white Pennsylvania. She lost the state by 68,000 votes. This is how turnout matters. Begins to matter tremendously. It matters where, and it matters on the margins. As Dan Pfeiffer, who was a press secretary for the Obama administration, no longer is, but was, said sometimes politics is simple. Democrats did not show up to vote, and now Trump is president. Well, sometimes quick takes are simple too. And I don't think this is the whole story. The reality is turnout was down, and yes, less inspired, particularly younger voters, by Hillary Clinton than Barack Obama. African Americans didn't vote for her in the same percentage. We'll get to that in a little bit. Latinos didn't vote for her in the same percentage they voted for Obama. We'll get to that. But it's not just turnout. There's things that influence turnout too. Okay? And one of those is new voter identification laws across this country. Voter ID laws. The Brennan Center at New York University has been tracking voter identification laws. They're the best site out there. It's something that I care deeply about. It is the fundamental core of democracy, is one person, one vote. Okay? Here's what the Brennan Center shows us in terms of voting restrictions that were put in place for the first time in states for this election. The dark red is a new restriction for this election. The light red is a new restriction that was in place in 2012. So they actually have not just 2016, they have new restrictions for 2012 in the light red and 2016 in the dark red. These are the states that have had new restrictions in place. This is not all of them that have created new restrictions since Barack Obama became president. There are others that created them in 2010. So the reality is this is not all of them, but it's a good chunk of them. And sure, you've got these southern states that were previously covered by the Voting Rights Act, which no longer have to be concerned about that in the same way. But you've also got Wisconsin, one of the most stringent voter ID laws in the country. 300,000 people did not have the appropriate voter identification in Wisconsin on first try in the last 2 years. Okay? That doesn't mean they didn't get there eventually, but they had to go through additional hurdles. You got Iowa, you got Ohio, you got Illinois, you got Virginia, you got New Hampshire, Arizona. All right? It is harder to vote in the United States today than at any point since 1965. So for all of these gains that you might have been feeling and thinking around issues of identity that have mattered to many of the people in this room, the reality is that if you're young, a person of color, elderly, disabled, or poor, it has become harder to vote in this country. And so what I like about this moment is that we need to look at that and deal with it in a way instead of just saying, okay, we got past it. This country has a lot of work to do around voting rights. And so I say to you, if you're looking for a cause, you're looking for something you want to mobilize around, there are organizations that will put you to work, studying, knocking on doors, engaging, working around this. No better one than the American Civil Liberties Union. Okay? So I say, in my view, and I'm asking you if you might think about whether we go all forward on voting rights. All forward. And you know the reason why we need to do that? Because other people before us did. They fought and died so that I could mail in a ballot. You can feel sorry, or you can say, not again. Everybody should have the right to vote, and that certainly includes people who have served their time and are out of prison. Okay? The reality is that you absolutely should have the right to vote in this country if you're a citizen. Second, let's talk a little bit about white evangelicals. I'm almost 50 years old. And for a period of time, I was a white evangelical. I have many friends who are white evangelicals. And so I am on Facebook and in conversation and on Twitter with them. And I have been very positively and very negatively impacted by those experiences over the course of my lifetime. There is much that white evangelicals can teach us about what it means to be in community, for example. The Northwest is terrible at community. White evangelicals can teach us a lot. I want to talk about how they voted in this election. Okay? let's look at exit polls, and let's look at the last 4 presidential elections. The red is, of course, when a Republican won, and the blue is when a Democrat won. What percent of the total turnout, first of all, was white evangelical? Of the entire electorate, what percent was it? And then what percent of that white evangelical turnout voted for the Republican candidate? So 2 things I'm going to show you. First is, what was the percent of the overall electorate that was white evangelical? And then what percent of all of those white evangelicals voted for the Republican candidate? Okay? In 2004, George W. Bush, as evangelical as they come in the modern presidency, 23% of the folks, 23% of the entire electorate was white evangelicals, almost a fourth. And of those folks, 78% of them voted for Bush. Okay? They are a very staunch component, the largest body of folks in the Republican voting bloc. And so at the presidential level, 78% voted for Bush. In 2008, John McCain, not the favorite of evangelicals, but they didn't despise him. 26% of the electorate in that election was white evangelical, so it crept up. And of that 26% who were white evangelicals, 74% voted for McCain. Wasn't their top choice, but still they were very solid with him. In 2012, Obama and McCain, evangelicals have had many issues over the years with whether or not Mormons are Christians and the different faith systems that might be at play. So there was some question about whether they would turn out to vote for Mitt Romney. Well, they did. 26% turned out in the electorate in 2012. Of all the electorate, 26% was white evangelical. And of that 26%, they went for Mitt Romney, 78%. So just like they went for George Bush, and a little bit stronger they went for John McCain, they went for Mitt Romney. In 2016, white evangelicals did not get their candidate. Were they going to turn out to vote for Donald Trump? Well, 26% did, and 81% voted for Donald Trump. %. Now, Donald Trump was not their candidate. They would have preferred Ted Cruz, Ben Carson. They would have preferred a lot of people before Donald Trump. In fact, they would have preferred probably 14 out of the other 15 candidates on the Republican side before Donald Trump. Okay? So I think it's really important for us to stop for a moment and think about this. 81% voted for Donald Trump. Higher than these other candidates, Bush especially, who fit the mold of what evangelicals say they're looking for in terms of moral positionality, in terms of a family person. Okay? So I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about this actually for months. I have, in my career, studied and looked at religion and politics and tried to understand why it is that white evangelicals have been such a powerful political force in the United States and how it is that politicians respond to them. And so here's an additional fact that I want to put on the table here that I think can help us to understand why that percentage is so high. Okay? So about a month ago, Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, Public Religion Research Institute, which is a non-theological, non-ideological, non-partisan polling firm, studies religion and politics, released a poll that asked this question in it. Do you think an elected official who commits an immoral act in their personal life can still behave ethically and fulfill their duties in their public and professional life? In 1998, when Republicans impeached Bill Clinton, the answer to this was clear among white evangelicals, that no, their position was no. You cannot do the things that Bill Clinton has done, sexually, lying, and still do this, and still be an ethical or good public servant. Well, they don't have data back till that period of time. They do have data back till 2011, though. So let's look at 2011 to 2016. 2011, as we moved into the 2012 presidential election, and 2016, as we were obviously in the middle of the 2016 presidential election. In 2011, when white evangelicals, that's the only numbers I'm showing you here, is what white evangelicals, people who self-identified as born again or white evangelicals, what the percent that said yes to this question, that an elected official can be personally immoral but still be professionally ethical in their public and professional lives, the percent that said yes among white evangelicals in 2011 was 30%. 30%. Okay? Overall, the percentage that said yes at that time was about 57 or 58% when you took everybody. So they were the lowest. Of all of the slices and dices in the data, they were the lowest in 2011. 30%. And this is what I would expect. Because there is an ethic that these individuals, or many of them, have about morality. It's a posture. It's an ethic about how you approach the world, and it's what I would expect. And it may not be my ethic, but I respect it. In 2016, a month ago, when they were asked this question, this is the percent of white evangelicals that said yes. So what's up? What makes this change? Well, clearly Trump as a nominee forced this moment of reckoning for white evangelicals. And this line, this balance between politics and religious or spiritual convictions is always a difficult dance for everybody. There's no high ground here for me to say that like politics should never trump religious convictions or whatever those we might term that second category. But they faced this moment, and they made a decision that they were going to change their position on this issue. And I think that we need to think about why that is. Okay? Why did they do that? It's fine that people change their minds. I'm always interested in why. What was going on? And so there's a lot of things that I could walk through and think about, or I have in my mind and in reading about why this was. But I come down with one core kind of answer to this question. And to me, the issue is because Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. That this is an example of white evangelicals holding conservative gender role expectations about the world, about where women should be and how women should act, that I think prompted a renegotiation in their minds about the candidate that they were presented with, Donald Trump. I have no other really positive, no other plausible answer for this to explain the unbelievable hostility among white evangelicals towards Hillary Clinton. I just don't have any other explanation for it. She's flawed, as we all are. But the level of opposition to her, the things we've seen in this election, and the fact that white evangelicals turned out to vote and voted so strongly for Trump is really, to me, the clearest evidence that I can point to of sexism in this election. Okay? I don't think that Donald Trump would have gotten that turnout among white evangelicals if the Democratic nominee was anybody who had the Mr. in front of his name. As long as it was a male, I think it would have been less. And we're talking about a very small percentages that made the difference in several states. So I talked about turnout a minute ago. That matters. But so too does turnout on the other side. There's a lot of white evangelicals in the suburbs of Detroit. There's a lot in rural Michigan. There's a lot in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin. These states have quite a few. All right? And so it's, sexism is almost more difficult to nail down than racism, because it's like Jell-O and it moves around, and we have accepted the kind of jokes and humor that pass, the kind of sexist things that pass in the kind of banality of the day-to-day existence. But when I look at that pattern over the last 4 presidential elections and I see that uptick, I've got no other example, no other evidence, no other explanation for this. And so to me, then, there is an all-forward moment for us on this. And that all-forward moment is that we need to work on female leadership in our society. Okay? We need to work across the board. We need to work everybody. And it sure as hell starts at a place like this, the University of Washington. All right? We need to empower, we need to build programs, but actually it probably starts earlier than this. And so I just want to mention 2 examples of how it is that you might engage around this. Think about girls in science, technology, engineering, and math. And the messages they get. They're there and they're robust and energized in elementary and maybe even preschool, and junior high, something begins to shift, and then to college, and then by the time they get here, somehow they've gotten through the oxygen the message that they don't belong. All right? We have got to change that. And I've had the privilege over the last 18 months or so to work with an organization, Washington STEM, that's doing that work. All right? We all need to do that work. All right? The reality is all forward on this. Okay? I have another example. On this campus, there is a women's center. At that women's center on this campus, there is an education leadership program. It's the Northwest Education Women's Leadership Program. Okay, it's an incredible program. A couple weeks every June, young females apply. They get mentored by people women in politics. It's particularly for women interested in political and public life. All right, it's a great program. I direct my students to look at it all the time. All right. That program is named for somebody named Elena Morris. Okay? Elena Morris is not some mythic figure who walks on water. All right? She's an incredible individual, but she's devoted her life to this. She's here tonight. Elena is here tonight, right? Yeah. So if you want to make a difference, you could volunteer in preschools. You could walk over to the Women's Center tomorrow morning and say, I want to be part of this. There are so many examples. There are no shortage of female empowerment opportunities in this place, in this time. And we have a lot of work to do all forward. Okay? So you can worry about President-elect Trump, or you can start to focus your energies. Okay? Third, I want to talk about racial identity in this election. All right? Exit polls again. And I want to look at 4 classes of voters: white Americans, African Americans, Latino Americans, and Asian Americans. And in this analysis, I want to try to look at all 4 of our last 4 presidential elections, and I'm going to cluster them because this was how I could make sense of it in my mind, from the Democratic victories and the Republican victories in the last 4 presidential elections. And I want to look at the coalitions that were present for the 2. So the Obama elections and the Bush/Trump elections. In 2008, Barack Obama got 43% of white voters. At that time, it was the smallest percentage anybody not named Michael Dukakis had gotten among the Democratic nominees. Okay? Among African Americans, he got 95% of their votes, 67% of Latino Americans, and 62% of Asian Americans. So obviously a heavily distributed body of support among people of color, not European Americans. That was in 2008. In 2012, Barack Obama got these numbers. He got the lowest percentage of support that a Democratic nominee's ever gotten among white voters. He was about the same for African Americans, but then an uptick among Latino Americans and Asian Americans. So it's even more diverse than in 2008. So what we have is it's gotten more diverse across these two elections. Less white, more diverse. Obviously, there's so many more white Americans than there are for others. So even though the percentage is lower, in sheer numbers, just sheer raw count numbers, there'd be more white voters in this coalition. But it's gotten more diverse over time. 2004, George Bush got 58% of white votes. Among African Americans, he got 11%. Among Latino Americans, he got 44%, the high water mark for any Republican nominee ever. And among Asian Americans, he got 44%. That's not a bad diverse coalition, actually. Very small among African Americans, but that's the best among Latinos that any Republican's ever gotten. And among Asian Americans, not shabby at all, 44%, almost half. Okay? 12 years later, Donald Trump, running with a couple other candidates, not just Clinton, but also Stein and Johnson, who drew a decent, not large, but some chunks of votes. Donald Trump in 2016 got 58% of the vote among whites, same as Bush. Got 8% of African Americans, 29% of Latino Americans, 29% of Asian Americans. Now, I don't know how he possibly got this number right here. And there's a lot of skepticism about that exit poll number, but it's the best we've got. Best exit poll data we've got at this time. Eventually, we will get census level data that will tell us more because they actually match census to voting patterns. But this is what we've got. But we see over time, the Republican coalition has gotten more white across these two. 58% has stayed solid in terms of percentage, but again, Trump was running against three others. And these numbers have declined. And this number is probably not quite that high. Okay? But this coalition has gotten less diverse. This coalition's gotten more diverse, and this coalition's got less diverse. And you know what? For the last 8 years, you know what I've told myself? Is that the one on the left is better. That's what I've told myself. It is. Because morally it is better. It is. It's America. That's where I think this country's going. That's what I want a president to do, is to appeal to a more diverse. But you know what? There's a problem with that one too, on the left. Neither one of these actually is sustainable. Neither one. Neither one is what we need. We need a coalition of voters that can talk to each other and vote for the same candidate across racial lines. Hillary Clinton got 37% of the white vote. Okay? So it isn't just about Barack Obama as a black man getting less. The reality is that Clinton drew the lowest percentage of a Democratic nominee ever among white voters. You can't sustain this coalition as a national body of people that can get along. You might be able to win an election, but they can't sustain as a society. And this society and this coalition might win an election here or there, but it too is dangerous. It's not going to work. This one might be more physically dangerous in terms of violence and the things that could come out of it, but this one is not healthy for a society either. We've got to be able to build coalitions that can cross these racial lines. It is an imperative for the 21st century. If long after we've all passed away, 100 years from now, they're looking at these coalitions and they've only gotten worse, then this country will not be this country as you know it today. It will be perhaps not even this country. Because you cannot sustain this kind of divergence as a people. Okay? So, I think we've got work to do no matter which side you might fall. You can believe, and I love this group. I do. I like the diverse world. That's why I'm a professor. I like to bring people together. But the reality is that even a place like this that brings people together, we have so much work to do on this campus. And this coalition needs work, and that coalition needs work, and we all got to be part of that. So we all need to go forward. And what we all need to go forward on is the idea of American pluralism. Either we're going to believe that we all have something to bring to the table, all of us, or we're going to keep locking up people, and then we're going to find other ways to segment off those that don't belong in our view. We need to put this front and center. American pluralism needs to be the identity of this country, front and center, going forward. It needs to work in terms of our racial identity. We cannot live in bubbles that are monochromatic. It is an ethical failing. Fourth, political power. It's my last area I want to talk about. Political power. Political power is great when you got it, right? It's the way the world should be when you have it. Let's look at the Republican Party that will take office in 2017. That is the Republican Party that's just been elected. So they aren't going to have office just yet in the U.S. Congress or in the state legislatures, but they will in January. So coming out of this election, governorships, state houses, state senates or state house, U.S. representatives, and U.S. senators. Let's look at where the Republican Party's at that takes office in 2017. Okay? How many governorships? How many total governorships are there? 50, yes. Okay, good. Okay? This is what, we do these clicker things in class, right, where you can pull out your phone and you can press a button and you can click. It's all magical. It's really great. And the percentage will show up right here on the screen. I'll bet you that our students would do well on that one too, okay? 50 governorships. So it is theoretically possible that there might not be a Republican or Democrat as governor, but we've only had a couple of those in the last, 60 or 70 years. So it's really a zero-sum game up to 50. Well, in 2017, there will be 34 Republican governors. 34. It's possible it could be 35, but it looks like Rory Cooper in North Carolina is going to beat Pat McCrory, okay? And so it looks like that's going to happen. So, and Cooper is the Democratic candidate. So it looks like it's going to be 34 Republican governorships. How many state houses? Well, here's what I mean by the math of state houses. I looked at every state legislature in the country, and they're all bicameral except for Nebraska. Nebraska has just one state chamber. Every other state, the rest of the other 49, all have a House and a Senate. Each of those is a separate entity. So across 49 states, we have 98 state either Senates or Houses, and then we have one in Nebraska. So we have 99 possible state houses that could be controlled in terms of a majority by one party or another. How many are going to be under control of Republicans in 2017? 67. Okay? 67. 2/3 are under the control of Republicans. In the U.S. House of Representatives, there's 435 seats, plus I think, was there one? I'm not sure, one, maybe two or three, a couple extras, one for the D.C., and then maybe, I don't know if our territories get a seat. I just don't know. But we'll go with 436 as a number, so half of that would be 218, would be half of that. So anything over 218 is a majority and controls the House. And when you have control of the U.S. House of Representatives, you have absolute control of the legislative agenda and how things happen. So how many will the GLP have? They have 237, give or take a couple that haven't been decided yet in California. So they're going to have 237 a large majority. In the U.S. Senate, there's 100 senators, so 50 plus is the majority. When you have the presidency, the GOP is going to have 52 of those. They're likely going to have more after 2018 because the states that are up for election in 2018 favor Republicans because the Democrats will be on the defensive in several states. So 52. Now this looks pretty harrowing if you're not a Republican. If you're a Republican, it looks pretty great. So it is definitely a Republican moment in this country. The fact that in Seattle, that's inconceivable to many, tells you far more about Seattle than it does about that kind of power. I just want you to know that in King County, 158,000 people voted for Donald Trump. 158,000. It's only 20% of King County, but it's 158,000. I would guess that most of you can't think of anybody in King County that voted for Donald Trump. You can counter-argue with me all you want. It's fine. The reality is that you certainly don't hang out with a lot of them. I'm not here to morally shame you or me for that reality, but it is a problem for our society. So this is the amount of power the Republican Party has. But let's just, for a point of comparison, go back to the Democrats in 2009. A moment of great joy among people in King County. When things were as they should have been, people would say. Governorships in the country. How many governorships did Democrats have in 2009 after the 2008 election, after the Obama wave? They had 29. It is a reality that there are more red states generally than blue states in the country, so Republicans are always going to have a slight state advantage in the governorships, but the Democrats had 29 governorships. State houses at that time, Democratic controlled, out of 99, Democrats had 58. In the U.S. House of Representatives, coming out of the 2008 election, Democrats had 257 seats. U.S. senators coming out of 2008, after, what was the guy's name in Pennsylvania that switched parties? No. Specter. Arlen Specter. He switched parties right after the election, became, in name at least, a Democrat, gave the Democrats at that point in time 60 Senate seats. Okay? So, power, when you have it, is often interpreted as good and the way the world should be. And power, when you don't have it, is interpreted as scary and potentially dangerous and something that requires eternal vigilance. And I would suggest to you that one of those two ways is the way we should look at this. Power should always be viewed with some anxiety and some fear, some humility, lots of humility. And the reality is that our country is not going to work unless we figure out how we're going to work together. All right? How are we going to do that? How are we going to work together? It isn't going to happen just by hoping. You actually have to do the work. You have to make the phone call and say, could we get coffee? I'd like to just hear what you're thinking. We might be willing to make the phone call, but you know what we do most of the time? We say, I want to tell you what I'm thinking. Let me suggest to you, with all love, that the most important human sense going forward is listening. Okay? If Hillary Clinton had spent 2 years after Secretary of State on a listening tour instead of giving talks, I think there's a very good chance she'd be president today. We need to listen. So here's what I call us to when I say all forward on this one. I say political reconciliation. Oh my God. Political reconciliation. Is it even possible? Is it even possible in this most divided country? I don't know. I really don't know if it's possible. But in the words of James Baldwin, the least we should hope for is the impossible. The least we should hope for. There have been millions of people in this world who have fought and died for things that they could not possibly conceive was possible, but they still tried. Okay? Are you going to try? Because I'm not really interested in just sitting here thinking like they're bad and we're good, or we're bad and they're good. It just doesn't do us any good. We need to somehow find a way to work together politically. We need to learn in that most un-American thing to share power. We need to learn to share power. Okay. The moral arc. You know, the great thing about this lecture for me is I can put it out there as straight as I want, and then I'm not going to see you again for a while, okay? I will undoubtedly, I'm hoping many of you will come to the Obama lecture series, and somehow in 2020 I'll be back if you're interested. Good chance I'll be working on a campaign. Just a quick aside, I've been talking to a campaign for some time about running in 2020, and not me running, but supporting them in 2020. It's always been a Democratic campaign, and I've been talking to them for over a year, and it's never been the Clinton campaign. There are many people that are not stunned by this outcome. Okay? It's unfortunate that they aren't. And I was never going to run against her, but there were many who were planning that the possibility was there that this could occur. Okay? So the reality is that I'll be back, you'll be back, we're going to endure, we're not going to break, because there is a moral arc that is bigger than anybody in this room, and anybody in this country, and anybody on this planet right now. Okay? Now, the famous phrase from Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King, is that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Man, I love that phrase. It inspires me. It compels me. But there's one thing about that phrase that doesn't get focused on, and it wasn't a point of focus for me until the last few years. The phrase is beautiful, but it doesn't tell us how the moral arc bends. It just says it bends. And the reality is that the moral arc of the universe doesn't bend unless we bend it. People have to bend it. It takes agency. It takes human engagement. It takes risk. It takes failure. It takes everything. And the reality is that people are trying to bend it different ways. So the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. I believe that is the historical story. But it's because people have bent it towards justice. All right? And so I started this lecture series back on January 4th by looking at a timeline in American history from the first presidency in 1789 all the way to 2016. And I just noted at that time a couple different moments in American history when people fought to bend that moral arc, and at that moment in time they made some breakthroughs that bent it in a more progressive, inclusive, expansive, libertarian, in the broadest sense way. All right? And I talked about those. One of those that I mentioned, based upon what historians have often said, is the mid-1840s to the mid-1860s, when abolition and women's rights came to the fore. They'd been around, but they got traction in a new way. Another era that I talked about was in the early 1900s in what became known as the Progressive Era, when again women's rights came to the fore and progressivism generally made inroads in terms of popular votes, popular election of senators, a national income tax, women's suffrage. The reality is that this was another era when the arc of the universe was bent in ways that were more progressive. And I talked about a third era in the mid-1900s, the mid-20th century, the civil rights era, when after generations and generations of work around issues of equality and justice and opportunity for African Americans, we began to make some progress. And the civil rights movement broke through for about a decade very strongly. And women's rights again rose to the fore. And we almost got an equal rights amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But in many respects, there was much progress around women's rights in this era. And then that spawned the gay rights movement. So this was another era. And I finished that lecture by noting that I think we're in the middle of one of those right now. That we're in the middle of one of those eras. And I said, the mid-2000s to today, I roughly pegged it. This was just me ballparking it, but guessing that I would peg it to the early to the 2003 Iraq War, to the 2004 re-election of George W. Bush, to the 2005 Hurricane Katrina, that these are all cataclysmic things that provoked a kind of opening up of rawness and difficulty and challenge for the country, and that we were in the midst of it. And I suggested that we're there today, and the battle has been joined over the last decade around same-sex rights and certainly economic inequality and a new civil rights era. Quick aside, if the Democrats really want to win back those voters that didn't turn out, they're going to need to come up with an economic inequality message. There's one out there. Okay? That message needs to be heeded and incorporated. All right? That economic inequality that is at the core of this country right now is a defining characteristic of how any political party goes forward today. So I said we're in the middle of one, and I said, hey, that's interesting, that's relevant, it informs where we're at. But here's something else that we need to know about each of those eras. Each of those eras also is a contested, deeply troubled, often violent, difficult time to live. Very difficult, not fun. And certainly less fun for everybody who's not white or a male or straight or of an economic class that's upper. So these are difficult eras. In the mid-1840s and 1960s, that ended in a civil war. The dissolution of the Union. In the early 1900s, early 1920s, that ended in a temperance movement that led to prohibition. It led to the highest membership of the Ku Klux Klan in this country's history. And it led to the Immigration Act of 1924, which more or less prevented people from Southern Europe, and especially from Asia and Africa, to come into the United States until the mid-1960s when they changed the immigration laws. A deeply xenophobic Immigration Act of 1924. In the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, this produced massive resistance to civil rights and the spawning of the religious right as a social movement that continues all the way to 2016 to be a defining characteristic of our country. It's politics. So these are all eras in which there's tremendous upheaval. And today, of course, as I mentioned, we have the Tea Party and its response against government, against its president, against the expansion of health care and immigration and other areas of progressive change, and the nativism, the kind of the sense that we need to look internally and protectionist in terms of economic policies, in terms of our military, making sure that we're continuing to invest in large numbers to protect this country. This kind of nativism that you need to look a certain way, you need to politically be a certain way, you need to worship a certain way today. And that's where I started this lecture series. Back in January. Yeah, it feels like a decade, right? I say that in all the positive ways. It's been really the professional gift of my life to spend these 3 elections with many of you. So I started the lecture series with this, and I've been focused on this, and I've done talks around this in so many places using this as a figure, and I talked about technology. I'm not going to get into technology today. And I talked about this, but here's where I want to end this lecture series. is I want to say that this is the reality of the arc of history, all right? These things did occur, and there were violence, and there was upheaval, and it was difficult. But this is all presented, when I present it this way, as if it just happened. As if there were not people making it happen. And that's the problem with the quote about the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice. It takes people out. And the reality is it takes people to do it. And I want to tell you about one person. I want to tell you about somebody named Amelia. Amelia. Amelia's ancestors were born in this period of time. They were born in the South. They were black. They were Cherokee. They were German. But they were mostly black because the definition of black in this country is one drop of black blood and you're African American. And so they were enslaved. Amelia's ancestors were. And they worked and lived their lives in Alabama and Mississippi and Texas. Eventually they became freed and struggled with all that came with that struggle after the ending of formalized slavery in this country. And Amelia was born. Amelia was born in 1911. Her name was Amelia Platts. Amelia Platts was born in 1911 in rural Alabama. At the age of 8 and 9, she went around the state of Alabama with her mother on a horse and in a buggy campaigning for women's suffrage. Okay? She was deeply skin-toned black, African American, going around campaigning for women's suffrage, knowing that she can't vote because she's black in the South, and she's not going to be able to vote because she's a woman either. The reality is it's not going to happen, but she still did this at the age of 8 and 9. My son, of course, is 9, so this strikes home to me. At the age of 14, she enrolled at Savannah State, graduated at the age of 18 from college, went to work for the United States Department of Agriculture, working in rural Alabama, interpreting USDA policies for farmers in the area. This is a picture of Amelia Platts. I don't have these pictures at my disposal, you can guess. So this is the one I've got. And so she didn't look this was not her at 8 or 9. All right, this is probably her 20-ish, around then. And Amelia Platts settled in Selma, Alabama, and worked there on behalf of those farmers in the area. And in 1932, even though Jim Crow was the law of the South, she co-founded the Dallas County Voters League. Dallas County is the county in which Selma resides. Even though there was no chance she was going to be able to vote, she still founded it with others. And in 1933, she married Samuel Boynton, and Amelia Platts became Amelia Platts Boynton, or as she would in history be known as Amelia Boynton. Amelia Boynton, with her husband Samuel Boynton, became part of a group known as the Courageous Eight, which met over decades in Selma fighting for voters' rights, even though this was a period of deep this and this darkness for the African American freedom struggle. But she kept fighting for it, and their home became known as the place where in Selma, if you wanted to fight for freedoms and you were black or you wanted to support black people, that you went to. And so they became the hub of the voting rights movement in Dallas County and in Selma, and eventually the civil rights movement found its way there and came in 1964. And actually the reason they came is because Amelia Platts Boynton, wrote a letter to Dr. King and said, please come, we need you. And so King came right after receiving the Nobel Prize in 1964 and came. It was the first thing he did when he came back to the United States. He got the award in December and he came back and he went in January to Selma, January 1965. And in 1965, they launched the Selma voting rights movement and it gained national attention. And they brought the press and they brought Lyndon Johnson's attention to Selma. And on March 7th, 1965, 200 local Selmaians got on that bridge and walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and got the living shit beat out of them. All right? By Jim Clark and by other whites. And this is Amelia Boynton right here. It's her. Age of 54. I'm not 50. She's 54. It's one of the two iconic images from that day. The other one is John Lewis knocked out, unconscious. This is Amelia Boynton being dragged back to Brown Chapel, a mile away. She was so unconscious and damaged that she was in the hospital for over a week. Okay? But that Selma movement didn't quit after they were beaten badly on Bloody Sunday. And they didn't quit after 3 days later when they marched across the bridge and then King turned them around and said, we're not ready yet. We still need a federal injunction to protect us. And he turned them around and walked them back to Brown Chapel again. They didn't quit. And eventually they got the protections they needed. And eventually they walked the 54 miles to Montgomery. And eventually they got the Voting Rights Act. The most important, in my view, voting policy in this country's history. And it will be a point of focus for me for the rest of my life. This is all forward time. And so Boynton there, she couldn't march in those other two marches because she was so badly hurt on March 7th, but she could go to the Rose Garden and meet Lyndon Johnson when he signed the Voting Rights Act. And she didn't say, no, I'm not coming. She said, I'm coming. Even though Johnson had been no friend of theirs throughout most of the Selma campaign. And that's her on the left, shaking hands with Lyndon Johnson. So Amelia Boynton never quit, never gave up. There's one thing I forgot. In 1963, as Selma was building the voting rights campaign, she and her husband, Samuel Boynton, discussed how it was that Samuel Boynton would face the end of his life because he'd had 2 strokes. And he was clearly not in good health. And they decided that they would turn his funeral service, a memorial service, into the first mass meeting in Selma. So when he died, they had the first voting rights mass meeting in Selma at his funeral service because they planned it. That's how dedicated they were. They were all forward. So Amelia Boynton became the matriarch of the voting rights movement in Selma. And Selma became the place where the stand was made that changed this country's history. So Amelia Boynton has made history. She has defined history. She is a woman who never could have imagined what would be, but still fought for it. And in 2015, on the 50th anniversary of the Selma marches, when we now have the first African-American president of the United States, President Barack Obama invited Amelia Boynton Robinson, because she'd gotten remarried, Amelia Boynton Robinson, to the White House, to the Capitol for the State of the Union address, and put her in the distinguished guest box at the age of 105. And Amelia Boynton Robinson sat there with all of her dignity, because you can't take away dignity. Sat there, and the president motioned to her, and it was a grand, glorious moment in January 2015. What it must have meant, what it must have been to look down and to see the first African-American president there. And then 2 months later, on the 50th anniversary of Selma, the Selma March of 1965, as I was there with a group of civil rights pilgrimage folks run through the University of Washington, and we were there with more than 100,000 people that came from all over the world. So too was Amelia Boynton Robinson. And here she is walking across the bridge with President Barack Obama. John Lewis, Michelle Obama. And I didn't take this picture, so I'm not the one who cropped this, but I want to make this point. Over here on this side, you can't see him, is George W. Bush and Laura Bush. Okay? They were there. They sat on the podium, on the stage, with President and Mrs. Obama. They were there. And they went across that bridge, and Amelia Boynton Robinson, or Amelia Boynton as she was known, walked across that bridge. Now, this was on Saturday, March 7th, which was the actual 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday by date. But in Selma, they commemorate Bloody Sunday on Sunday because Sunday matters to them. It was a Sunday, and they want to remember that Sunday. So on the next day, the Sunday, which was March 8th, was actually the local celebration. And there were 60,000 people there for Barack Obama on Saturday, and there were 120,000 there on Bloody Sunday's commemoration on March 8th. And we were there then too. And we had to catch our bus pretty quickly after we were going to commemorate by going across the bridge. So we had arranged to be close up to the bridge. And we were there waiting for when they would say, okay, everybody, let's walk across. And there were just thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And every once in a while, a dignitary would move through the crowd. And you would know this because you could see a kind of moving space being opened. And so you would see you couldn't see who it was, but you knew there was somebody because there was this open area, just enough for somebody to walk through with a little clearinghouse around. And so we were there, and there was a space being moved through. And so every time that would happen, you'd want to see who it was. We're hoping it was John Lewis or Terry Sewell, who is the locals congresswoman from Selma. So this happened one time, and we all looked over, and we couldn't see who it was. And so we crowded a little bit closer because it was coming close to us, and we had to look down because it was a woman in a wheelchair being pushed by somebody, and it was Amelia Boynton. And Amelia Boynton, not in that outfit, she was wearing a different shirt this day. The shirt she was wearing had a picture of her from 1965 on it. And she was being pushed along, and our students crushed over to greet her, and I was trying to be all cool and calm about it. I'm like, it's Amelia Boynton, right? And they walked over, and they grabbed her hand, and she was so vibrant and full of life, and she kissed them, and she hugged them, and they hugged her back, and people took all these pictures. And she leaned over to one of our students. I know you think I'm making this up, but I'm not. She leaned over to one of our students and she said, I met the president yesterday. And our students, we're in such awe of the moment. And they said, yeah, I know, because she was actually up on the stage too with the president. So we had seen her up there. And she said, he told me he was going to give a speech. This is what she said to one of our students. And my student said back to her, what did you say? And she said, it better be a good one. And Amelia Boynton passed away in August of 2015. Having already planned her funeral service to be a moment of civil rights celebration, one of the people who spends time with us on our trips, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, was tasked by Amelia Boynton to give the eulogy. And she said, I want two. I want one in Selma and I want one in Tuskegee. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to come. And thousands did. And Bernard said it's the only time he in his life, he's a reverend, he in his life has ever given two eulogies, and they were different. He wrote two different eulogies. She deserved it. Okay? This is about history. This is about a person. This is about someone who said, I will believe, I will stand, I will go all forward even though I cannot see what will happen. Okay? So, you know what? 20, 30 years from now, someone else is going to stand on the stage. And they're going to come up here, and they're going to be wearing shorts, and they're going to write... They're going to put a timeline up there that says this. They're going to put that timeline up there, and they're not going to know anything about me or you except for maybe what we do from this point forward. And they're going to look at this, and they're going to say, you know what? I think there are moments in American history when the moral arc has been bent, and people stood up and fought for things, and they stood strong, and they moved all forward. And they're going to say, you know, there was that moment in the mid-1840s to the mid-1860s And they're going to say, you know what? There was that moment in the early 1900s. And there was that moment in that period of time in the mid-20th century. And they're going to say there was that moment. That was that moment in the early 21st century when people did. And they stood up for their convictions. And they bent the moral arc of the universe. And the question for us is going to be this. It's going to be, when does that end? Does it end today? Is this era done? Because here's the story of the other three, the three that precede this, is that they all ended with conservative dominance. There was progressive change followed by conservative dominance. And that they spent the rest of time until that next phase holding on, a rear guard defense, trying to protect the advances that have been made. And so, is it today where that is the end? But you see, most of those were about 20 years, and I don't think we've gone 20 years. I think we're in the middle. What a gift to be in the middle. What an unbelievable challenge to be in the middle of the story. So when's it going to end? Well, I want to suggest to you that it's going to end in the early to mid-2020s. And here's what's going to happen between now and then. In 2020, we're going to have another presidential election. And in 2018, we're going to have some midterm elections. And in 2017, we're going to have city council elections. And all those years, we're going to have like school board elections. We're going to have school levies. We're going to have all this stuff. So, you know what? You got to pick yourself up. We all do. Amelia Boynton was knocked out cold on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, walking over a bridge that you cannot see the other side. You cannot see the other side of. Every time I walk across that bridge, I am reminded you cannot see what's on the other side. And if Amelia Boynton was here today, Amelia Boynton Robinson, if she was here today, I believe that she wouldn't say to us, it better be a good one, that era. I think she would say to us, it better be different. Because those earlier ones, she said, didn't end the way we wanted them to end. So I ask you, how's it going to end? How's this arc going to go? What's the rest of this story? I'm all forward. I'm going to show up. You have choices to make. We're done. See ya. Let's go. Thank you. All forward. I challenge you to write it down and put it on your wall. Put it on your phone, put it on your wall, put it anywhere. All forward. Let's go.